continue in the book of Judges this morning. We're in Judges chapter 5 with the song of Deborah and Barak. We started that last week and got a few verses in, and we'll continue on with that this morning. And again, as we said before, this is a song. It's poetry. It's literature. And there are parts of it that we read and we don't quite get the context of what she's singing about. And that's okay, because some of it may be simply a word picture to describe in different terms what was happening and ways to praise God. So as we go through this and you think, I just don't know what that means, well, that's probably a lot of us. We're not quite sure what it means, other than Deborah and Barak are praising God for the things that He has done for them. We titled it The Song of Deborah and Barak and the Song of Salvation, because that's what they're singing about, the salvation of Israel. Beginning in verse 13, then the survivors came down, the people against the nobles. The Lord came down for me against the mighty. From Ephraim were those whose roots were in Amalek. After you, Benjamin, with your peoples. From Machir, rulers came down. From Zebulun, those who bear the recruiter's staff. And the princes of Issachar were with Deborah. So as Issachar, so was Barak, sent into the valley under his command. Among the division of Reuben, there was great resolve of heart. So as we look at that, we talked a little bit last week about the idea of the survivors that came down. We made the point that in chapter 4, the point was made that all of Sisera's army was destroyed to the last man. And so we talked about who those survivors might be. And just because the entire army was destroyed didn't mean the entire community was destroyed. The entire group of people from where they came was destroyed. And so there were still survivors there. That was where they came from. And notice it says there in verse 14, Ephraim, Benjamin, Machir, Zebulun, the princes of Issachar were with Deborah, and Issachar, so was Barak, sent into the valley under his command. So what does that tell us about the content of the army that went against Sisera? It was what? It was the tribes. It was several more tribes. It was Naphtali and Zebulun were the ones called to send their men, but obviously others came to their aid and to their help in that process. And so there was more than just those two tribes that were fighting in this particular battle. And part of that has to do with the fact that once Sisera's armies fled, they fled back through those territories. And as they fled through those territories, it could be that those people came out to assist Zebulun and Naphtali in the fight against them so that they could be destroyed to the last man. And of course, we said Sisera fled, and we talked about the story of him getting a tent peg drilled through his head by the wife of Heber the Kenite last week. And we'll talk a little bit more about that because that's in the story. So it wasn't just those two tribes. It was a larger group of Israel that participated in this. But notice down at the bottom there, let's stop there. The recruiter's staff. I looked that up to figure out what that meant, and I got this fantastic answer of an uncertain Hebrew term. And so that was a little frustrating. The English Standard says lieutenant's staff. King James says they that handle the pen of the writer. New American Standard, the staff of office. NIV, the commander's staff. In New Revised Standard, the marshal's staff. And so from those Zebulun who bear what would you say those people are? Who were they?
Officials.
Huh?
Officials.
Okay, officials. They were officials who had the authority and the power to go out and lead the people. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. It has no bearing really on our discussion, but I found that interesting, that phrase there, and scholars just aren't quite sure exactly what it means, but you can see that the translation of it in the various versions are all kind of similar in that process. But notice that last phrase there in verse 15. Among the divisions of Reuben, there were great resolves of heart. What does that sound like for Reuben? Okay, repentance. What else? Pardon?
Dedication.
Dedication. Okay, all right. But let's read on. There was great resolve of heart. Why, again, talking about, why did you sit among the sheepfolds? To hear the piping of the flocks. The divisions of Reuben have great searchings of heart. Gilead stayed beyond the Jordan. Why did Dan remain on ships, and Asher continue at the seashore, and stayed by his inlets? Zebulun is people who jeopardized their lives to the point of death, and Naphtali also on the heights of the battlefield. So backing up to that last phrase there was great resolve of heart, but then it goes on to say something that seems completely opposite. How do you explain that? What do you think's going on here?
I think Reuben had meetings, committees, councils, surveys, feasibility studies. They did everything except get up and go join the army.
Okay, so Reuben had great resolve of heart. Went the wrong way. They had great resolve of heart, but that didn't translate into actually doing anything during the battle. And isn't that a powerful lesson for all of us? You can have great resolve of heart, and you can be enthusiastic, and you can be ready to go, and you can be on fire for doing something. But what does that get you? Marcia?
My mother always said good intentions don't mean anything.
Okay, good intentions don't mean anything.
It's only part of the equation.
Okay.
Like you said, you say you believe, I'll show you my belief by my action.
Okay, yeah. Faith without works is dead. I'll show you my faith. You show me your faith by your work, or show me your faith, and I'll show you my faith by my works. James talks about it in the New Testament. And so here we've got a group of people who yeah, they were all in on this, but it never got past the resolve of the heart. They didn't actually put it into practice. They didn't actually do anything with it. Great searchings of heart there in the last verses, 16. As Grady said, they must have talked until they were blue in the face about this. And they thought and they planned and they figured, and then it just never got done. I'm guilty of that. In my shed out back, I've got this clipboard. And I've drawn up plans for this little project and that little project and that little project and this project over here. And man, those plans are good, if I do say so myself. But they're still hanging on the clipboard. And not a one of them have been done. And so planning, yes, is a necessary part of that, but if you don't ever implement that plan, then it's just a piece of paper hanging on a clipboard in Kevin's shed. There's just nothing that comes of that, all that planning. And so there's got to be the idea of the planning and the resolve of the heart, and then the carry through, and then the doing of it. John?
We see that, and we're all, as you say, we're all guilty of this too. Oh, somebody should go Bible study with that person. Somebody should take a meal with that person. Somebody is sometimes us.
Right.
We're the ones who should go and do that.
Yeah. It's a matter of, we have all these good ideas, but sometimes we don't really want to do those good ideas. Somebody else, as John said, ought to do that. Go ahead.
Here I am, send me.
Yeah, Isaiah said, "Here I am, send me." If you come up with something that you think would be a good idea, and you are all on fire about that, but then let's say you bring it to the elders, and the elders say, "That's a great idea. That's a wonderful idea. We ought to do that. Why don't you take charge of that?" What sometimes is the response?
I'm the idea guy.
Yeah, I'm the idea guy. Wait a minute. I don't want to do this. I just thought it was a good idea.
Searching hearts.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the lesson for us in this is, even in ancient Israel, there were people who were physically or mentally on board with things, but it didn't translate into the physical part of it. They didn't actually do anything in this resolve. And Deborah's chiding them a little bit for that, and that you didn't. You sit and listen to your sheep bleat, rather than actually getting out and doing something. You had great searching of heart. You had great ideas. You had resolve to do something, but you just never came out and did it. Then verse 17, Gilead, Dan, Asher. Gileon stayed beyond the Jordan. They didn't come to help either. Asher or Dan remained on ships. I'm not sure what that connection is, if they were more seafaring people or whatever the case may be, but they weren't there. Asher continued on the seashore. Some other versions word that just a little different, huts on the seashore, or whatever the case may be. But they basically stayed at home, stayed by their inlets, stayed where they were safe, away from the fray, away from the issues that were going on in other parts of the nation. And Deborah points that out. And, verse 18, Zebulun is a people who jeopardize their lives to the point of death. Zebulun went out, did the deed, risked their lives to save Israel, and you guys didn't do that. Naphtali also on the heights of the battlefield. And so again, Zebulun and Naphtali are the heroes of this story, along with Deborah and Barak, because they went when they were told to go, and they did what they were told to do. And they get a great thumbs up, if you will, because of what they did. And the others, there was a little chastisement there. Now, this may be a little foreshadowing of what was going on in Israel, because if I remember right, after Gideon defeats his enemies, don't some of the other tribes of Israel come and say, hey, why didn't you invite us? Why didn't you call on us? And there's periods throughout the book of Judges and during the Kings and all of that where there was this seemingly infighting among the different tribes of Israel, where they didn't get along. Where does that come from? Jealousy of the other tribes. Gideon won a great battle, and we weren't involved in it. Why didn't you call us to help? And maybe Gideon's answer would have been, God said I could only take 300. You weren't in that group, so that's the way it happened. But the tribe organization in Israel, each tribe was separated. Each tribe got their own land. Each tribe had their place that they lived. But it was drilled into them when they conquered the land of Canaan, especially those that stayed on the far side of the Jordan. You can have that land, but what was the condition of that? Having that land. You've got to go fight with the rest of us for that. Your land is secure. You can leave your people there, but you've got to come help us in the rest of the conquest of Canaan. And so they did, which was a good thing for them to do. They helped out in that process. But then after everything got calm, after they'd conquered the land, after they were settled in, then you seem to have this, in some way, shape, form, or fashion, this drawing up of division walls between the different tribes. And they had, whether it was jealousy, as John said, or maybe they felt like they were more important than that other tribe. We're bigger than that tribe. We're more powerful. We produce more than that tribe. Whatever their motivation was behind that, there seemed to be a little bit of contention between them. And why is that? There you go. I think it's just a representation of they were human. And they had drawn up in their tribes as God had asked them to do. And then they got to thinking about themselves and thinking about how important they felt they were. And then that self-importance manifested itself in the way they dealt with their brothers in other tribes. And so there was times in Israel's history from this point forward where we see a little bit of that. There's civil war between them a little bit later on in the Judges, and even after the Kings came along, there was strife and discord. And so, what's the lesson for us in that? We said that we're studying this book of Judges to find out what lessons we can learn for the church out of this ancient narrative. What does that tell us about the church?
Division is something that we should strive to avoid.
Okay, division is something we should strive to avoid. Why would we be divided? Go ahead, Benita.
Get along together.
Get along together. Why might we be divided? Okay, because we're human. Back to that same answer. Because we, well, same thing happens here. Let's go back to that illustration of somebody has a great idea to do something and brings it to the elders. They say, I've got this idea and this, and we're going to do this, and this, and it's going to bring this and this results. And you're firmly convinced about that. And the elders say, okay, let's try that. Will you be in charge of it? And you say, okay, I'll do that. And so it's presented to the congregation. And you're all on fire and say, we're going to have a meeting right down here at front. That's our standard operation. And have a meeting down here, down front after services. And we're going to talk about it. And 3 people show up to that meeting. You ever seen that happen before? And the person who's in charge says what? They're discouraged. Well, forget this. And so there's an instant tension there. And so, and again, it could be for any number of reasons why the meeting didn't happen the way they thought it would, or whatever the case may be. But it's just something like that can be so easily drive wedges between us. Because I have something that I think is great and nobody else shares that view with me. And therefore I get upset because, well, I've got ideas and you don't. What's wrong with you? And again, it goes back to that issue of jealousy and pride that we were talking about. I'm prideful in what I want to do, and if I don't get the help I think I deserve, then I'm just going to take my ball and go home. And you say, well, hopefully we would never act that way, and ideally, hopefully we never would. But again, we're all human. we all sometimes get our feelings hurt and all of that. John, you had a comment.
I was going to say, we each have individually our own brothers, the things that we are comfortable with. And there are other people that we find within the congregation that are similar to us and our brothers. And we all bring a little bit of baggage to whatever it is we're going to, and there ends up being, you got to deal with that stuff when you get with a group of people.
Yeah, John mentions that some of us have things we would rather do and other things we would rather not do, and we have our own baggage with that of how that's affected us in the past, and that clouds how we look at something. And so it's, as humans, in trying to get along with each other, we have to keep all that in mind, that give the other person the benefit of the doubt if they don't see things the same way you do, because maybe they've had a similar situation with that and it didn't go well for them. And you're proposing something very similar and you think it's going to work, and maybe it will, but they're hesitant because of how that's played out in the past. Yes?
I think the Lord knows we're like that.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many scriptures that encourages us to love one another and get along with one another.
Mm-hmm.
So he knows we have that problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Owen, you had a comment.
Yeah, this is a big difference here between, well, just like them and us. If you're not serving the Lord, you're always going to have problems. You're not going to have peace. And some of us I've learned the hard way that not submitting to God is not a good idea. If you're going to be a member of the church and you're going to be participating and you're going to be working with the elders, the leadership, people, whatever it may be, you got to put yourself out there, feelings aside, because sometimes things that you think are right can be wrong, depending on the scriptures and their interpretation. So that's where a problem can come up. Anything like when we had the meeting about how we were going to do the church. Somebody can say, well, I want this color carpet, or I want this type of glass in the windows, I want this. We all have to come to a consensus that, are we in Christ? Do we love one another? Are we going to give a little bit? Are we going to, contemplate what we're going to do and how we're going to do it? Each one of us, every day when we wake up and every night when we go to bed to pray, we're thinking, if we're not thinking about God and what He has to do in our lives when we get up in the morning and throughout the day, we've already got an issue, because we won't all be on the same page. That's why grace is so important to study the Word. It's so important to understand what God wants us to do, not what I want to do. That's the way I used to be. I said, oh, God, you want me to do this? That's fine, but I'm not doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. And keep in mind the context of what's going on here in the book of Judges. They were faithful for a generation or two. Then they followed other gods. Then they were restored. They followed other gods. Then they were restored. I think this is the third narrative, isn't it? And followed other gods, and now they've been restored. So all of that influence of the Baals and the Asherahs and all those other nations around them have permeated Israel at this point. And that may say something about why there's this infighting and no feeling of unified nationality, because they've all been divided doing their own little thing outside of God's will. And so we can't forget about that. And as we discuss this, Redemptor, you had a comment.
I was just going to say, Peter says we can love one another fervently.
Fervently, absolutely. Love one another fervently. Does that mean we have to agree on everything? Yeah. Good luck with that. But I can disagree without being disagreeable, can't I? And so when we have something going on within the body of Christ and we all come together and there's a difference of opinion, there's a way that can actually be a good thing, because we get different, because I may be focused on whatever this project is that I've come up with that I think is going to be a great idea, and I'm so focused on it I haven't thought about the outlying consequences of that choice, the consequences of those actions, and what's going to happen if this happens, or what's going to happen if this happens. And somebody else can say, well, wait a minute, if that happens and this is the result, then here's something that's going to come up that we're going to have to deal with. And so that dialogue is always a good thing. It's frustrating. Why? Because it takes a long time, doesn't it? And it's easy to become like Reuben. Boy, we talk it over. We have committees. We have surveys. And we go to the end of the world to figure out all the things we need to do it, and it never gets done because all we're doing is planning. And so, again, I think these lessons that we see in ancient Israel are just as possible to happen within church if we're not careful about how we deal with each other and how we love each other and how we care for each other. John, do you have a hand up?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I was laughing because we kind of, I think, fall in love with our own idea. We go through all these iterations in our mind and kind of like, yes, this is it. This is perfect. I've done house layout drawings that I think would be really great, and I've gone through all the stuff, and Yumiko looks at it and goes, I'd rather have this, or can we do this over there instead? And I'm like, shuffle the whole thing.
Yeah.
But we go into that feeling like, wow, this is great. I've worked out all the rough edges on this thing, and it's perfect. Look, here's that. And then,
And so the first thing you get is feeling of rejection, right? I mean, that's not what it is necessarily, but that's how I feel, don't you? Okay, I've just been rejected. Like you say, I had this all worked out, it's perfect. And Yumiko says, no, I don't want the kitchen there, I want it over here. It's like, ah. And so, again, that interaction with humans is it's a struggle. But if we love each other to begin with, and if we're all on the same page about, as Ellen said, serving God and doing what's best for His kingdom, then we can work through all those little piddling issues as long as we keep our attitudes right, as long as we love each other, and we understand. Because here's, trying to think how to say this without putting my foot in my mouth. As John said, when I come up with the idea, it's brilliant, isn't it? And when you don't see the brilliance of my idea, there's something wrong with you. And that's kind of how we react, isn't it? It's kind of how we do, and that's not the issue at all necessarily. They're not questioning your brilliance. They're just saying, have you thought about this way to do it instead of that way? And it's again, if I had the answer to how to fix all this, I would. I do have the answer. Love one another fervently, as Redemptor said. Keep that in mind. That should cover a lot of those issues. Flo?
Well, one of the facts that we have to always look at, historically, experience that I've seen in the church, no matter what size congregation you're in, there's a certain group that do a lot, and some others don't participate. The issue here is we have to be careful that sometimes when we are active and we're doing a lot of things, and that's because we want to, we love the Lord, we love the church, we love our Christian friends, is that don't get ourselves thinking that, well, here I am, everything that I do and how good I look, and that's where it fails. We tend to pass judgment on somebody else, like you said earlier. We don't know what other people's situations are. Can they, whether they want to or not, it's still an issue. We can't pass judgment on them. And we don't want to exalt ourselves because we're active and we're doing all these things, and all of a sudden, here I am, puffed up because of what I do. And that's not what God wants. And one of the most discouraging things I heard once in the congregation from an elder in the pulpit one Sunday night. We all there, you know how it is. Every congregation I ever studied, researched, probably 50% or less come on Sunday night, no matter what congregation you're in. And I did research across the country. And it just happens. And he stood up there and says, you know, here we are, the faithful few. I thought it was the most discouraging thing I ever heard as a young Christian, because all of a sudden we're saying, here we are, the perfect, the most faithful, and we don't know what other situations are in the congregation or other members of the church. So we have to be careful not to puff ourselves when we're doing so much.
Right.
It's not that that's what it's about. We're doing it because we love God, we love Jesus, we love the church, and we want to participate. And others might not, but it's not for us to pass that judgment.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have to be careful, because just because I have a mindset doesn't mean that everybody shares that mindset. And, you know, it goes back to the very first thing we ask in this thread of this discussion. What caused this, perhaps? And we said jealousy. And where does jealousy come from? Pride, as Flo was talking about. It comes from being puffed up. And either I'm jealous of other people because they are not doing as much as I and seem to be getting as blessed as much as I, or maybe I'm on the other side and I'm jealous because that guy's so arrogant and he thinks he knows it all and trying to do everything and make himself look good. And we can come up with all these reasons to not get along. And let me stop here. I don't see that at Pikes Peak, okay? I don't see that happening here. So this is not an indictment against this congregation, but it's pulling a lesson out of here so that we keep it firmly in our minds so that we never let that happen here. And it can. You say, well, it can't happen here. Oh, yes, it can. Just ask any church that's been through strife, and they'll tell you, we didn't ever think that would happen here. But it can. And so it's all up to us to make sure all I can do is make sure that I act correctly and appropriately. I can't control you, you can't control me, but if we're all acting correctly and appropriately, that's going to go a long way. Deborah?
I was just going to say, many congregations where people avoid each other because
Yeah.
they're not getting along. Over here, all them are that way, you're coming that way.
Yeah.
So that they don't have to be around.
Right. And if we're divided in the body, if we can't even talk to each other, there's something wrong there. And that's not being the called out people of God. Something else. And again, that's what Israel was dealing with, largely perhaps because of the influence of the idolatrous nations around them and their own. Well, what do we say the key verse in Judges was? Everybody did what was right on his own side. And so that's an issue that they had to deal with, and may we never feel that way. Yellow?
One of the things that's really important is to understand what your gift is. Some of us can talk, some of us can mix around, somebody else can't. But the one thing I do know is when you start to get to talk to people and to get to know people, you learn some of their habits. So when you see them in the morning and you say hi to them, you know when something's wrong because they're not acting that way. And then you have an opportunity to talk to that person, get to know that person a little bit more, and try to figure out what's going on in their lives and how you can help them. Because when it says to love someone fervently, when you look at the definition of fervent, that means you are actually trying to do something for somebody and you put them first before yourself. Sometimes we can't, but it's beyond your mind, and you'll always find a way to either make a phone call, whatever it may be. But if we just come here and warm the pews and we're not interested in how other people feel around us, that's the wrong idea. We come here to find out what is wrong with each one of you that I can help you get through. Because we all have issues. The opposite side of the coin is you got a great idea, that's great. But some people have sin, that's not great. We need to be able to help them, convince them that if they're going to serve God, that sin has got to go, because we have to be holy. We have to be acceptable. And we are going to be judged, or we're going to stand there about our works and say, you knew someone was having this problem. They had this surgery. Why didn't you say something? You knew that this person's father or husband passed away. Why didn't you say something? Why didn't you send a card? There's a myriad of things that we can do for each other if we only stop and think about what they need. That's what we're here for, to build them up, to make them strong. But if you do not know what your gift is, then how can you work with them? You have to search your heart. You have to pray with other people. Lord, I know I have a gift. Show me what it is. God answers prayers. Just like I told a friend of mine, I said, when you pray to God, you have to believe that what you're praying for, He's going to give it to you. It may not be right now, not tomorrow, maybe down the road, but pray, 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 and pray. If it's for a person, if it's for a situation, if it's for the church, if it's for this country, it's for our friends, it's for our family, most of them that are lost. It's just, we have to be aware that God is with us 24 hours a day, 365 days a week, every minute, every second. Everything we do, we have to be able to include God in our motives.
Yeah, it all boils down to our relationships, doesn't it? And our interactions with each other. And if we don't know each other, then we don't know each other and can't be as understanding or as encouraging, or sometimes if we need to reprove or rebuke, we can't do that if we don't have that relationship. And so, again, all this comes back to what was going on here in Israel and the tension between these groups of people. And Deborah's pointing that out. She's the leader of Israel. That's what leaders needed to do. And pointing out also, though, not only those who didn't participate, but again, Zebulun and Naphtali, look what they did, the great job that they did. And so when we talk about our gifts, some of us question, what is my gift? What can I do? Sometimes, Kevin's personal opinion, sometimes I think we worry too much about, is this my gift, rather than just going out and doing something. Because sometimes I've gone out and done things I didn't think I was very good at. You know what? Turned out all right. May not have been the best thing I've ever done, but I did it. And it wasn't a fact of, okay, I've got my list of gifts that's on take to my mirror in the bathroom. I don't. The list, and I can add that to my list. That's not quite how it works. Sometimes it's just an opportunity to do something, and we take advantage of that opportunity. And it may say nothing about our skills and our gifts, because that may be our gift, seizing opportunity and making a difference in that point in time. All right? Any other thoughts, comments, questions? Flo.
Well, our example, and when I drive up on Sunday morning and I see where I park, I see Janet coming in, parking, and Ed's with her sometimes. What they've gone through, what they've been going through lately, is such an encouragement to me. That's the example that I look at. Not who isn't here, who's not coming. They're the ones that encourage me to see what they've done. And I see them every Sunday morning here, no matter what situation they're in, and they're here. That's what matters in our church when it comes to each other.
So am I hearing you say look for the positive and not for the negative? Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? I know our brother Brent always says, I didn't ask to point him out, but he always says when he does announcements, your presence here is an encouragement to me. And I think that's true. It is an encouragement. Yeah, there are people that are not here this morning, and I don't know why they're not here. Some of them are sick. Some of them are still traveling. Some of them, who knows what. Some of them just didn't want to come. Okay, that's fine. But I can't say, well, I'm not going to do as much because so-and-so didn't come to services this morning. I've got to realize, okay, all I can do is what I can do. And what I can do is this and this and this and this. And I'm not going to let that be hindered because of what I don't see out here in the pews. And again, it all boils down to one of these days we'll stand before God, and who's going to be the judge of all that? God is. So I don't worry, let's not worry about that. I'll worry about myself because I'm the one who's going to have to give an account. And I'm not going to account for you, you're not going to account for me. So that's the nature of this idea. Let's just do what we can do. And yes, we're going to have setbacks. Yes, we're going to have failures. But we're also going to have successes. And we're also going to have huge victories. And the interesting thing about that is, sometimes the success we have, we don't realize we've had it until you wait a week or a month or a year or 2 years. Because what you've done is plant a seed, and it's got to take time for that seed to grow. And so, again, all this comes from this idea of the tension between these tribes in the days of Deborah and Barak. The kings came and fought, and the kings of Canaan fought. In Taanach, by the waters of Megiddo, they took no spoils of silver. They fought from the heavens. The stars from their courses fought against Sisera. The torrent of Kishon swept them away. That ancient torrent, the torrent of Kishon, O my soul, march on in strength. And again, she's just singing the song of praise. Verse 19, the kings came and fought. The kings of Canaan fought. Taanach, by the waters of Megiddo. And what does that last phrase said there? They took no spoils. What does that mean?
They weren't there.
They weren't there. They lost the battle. They came to fight. Kings of Canaan came to fight by the waters of Megiddo in Taanach. But they took no spoils of silver. They didn't win. And that's the message that Deborah's trying to get across to all the tribes. God was fighting for us. The enemy didn't win. And as long as Israel was faithful, that was true every single time, no matter what they were facing. Again, what was it, 900 iron chariots for God? No big deal. And verse 20, it says, they fought from the heavens. The stars from their courses fought against Sisera. Wonder what that means. And when I say I wonder, I really wonder because I don't know what that means for sure. Okay, angels. They fought from heaven on God's side. Could very well be. Again, we rely on the narrative of chapter 4 to tell us what happened, and it doesn't give us that many details. But here we have, they fought from heavens, whoever they were. The stars from their courses. Who were, or whatever these people or things or beings were? They were the good guys because why? They were fighting against Sisera. So wherever that comes from, whatever that means, they were on the Lord's side, whether they're angelic beings or whether it's just a poetic way of saying how Naphtali and Zebulun fought with valor and majesty in the fight. They fought from the heavens. They fought as though they were angelic warriors, maybe. I don't know what the meaning of that is, but they fought against Sisera. And then verse 21, we talked about this earlier. Several of the commentators you read about this particular narrative in chapter 4 and verse 5 pick up on that verse 21 and verses previous and say that the defeat of the 900 chariots of iron was because there was a huge torrent of rain. And it swelled the Kishon River, and all that water just bogged down the chariots, and they were no longer useful. Could that happen? Sure. I mean, if God so deems it, that's what could have happened. Is that exactly what happened? Well, we don't know. Chapter 4 doesn't say anything about that. Chapter 5, she's singing. Could it be that she's using poetic imagery and poetic license here to explain the victory? Or is she recounting something that the author of the book of Judges didn't recount in chapter 4? And I'm going to have to tell you with all confidence, I don't know about what that means. Whatever, God was victorious, however that battle looked. And that's what Israel needed to remember. And she says there in that last verse, "O my soul, march on in strength." She's saying that of herself. March on in strength. See the mighty works that the Lord has done. Look what he's done for you in this battle. Think back to what he's done for Israel, all the way from when they left Egypt, through the wilderness wanderings, through the conquest of Canaan. Look what he's done for you, all the mighty works he's done for you, and march on in strength. And so the purpose of this narrative, again, we read the book of Judges, and it's a depressing book. It's a frustrating book because there's so much bad that happens. And yet I think the message of the book, as it was intended to be, is summed up right here in the last part of verse 21. Deborah's saying, march on in strength because you know the Lord's with you. And I think that is the whole purpose of why this narrative was in there. Remember some of our considerations? We said there is nothing that God can't overcome. All right, we're out of time. Appreciate your participation this morning. We'll pick up in verse 22, Lord willing, next week.